But we like to start our news with good news where we can, and it is good news, Mike.
Absolutely, because opium production is up, as you would expect. Bumper harvest this year in Afghanistan. This year's Afghanistan Opium Survey out today. Let's just have a quick look at the types of thing they say. In 2017, opium production increased by 87% compared to 2016 levels. The area under opium poppy cultivation increased to a record 328,000 hectares in 2017. That's up 63% compared to 2017, up 63% compared to 2016. The average opium yield is at 27.3 kilograms per hectare. That's 15% higher than 2016. But one thing that they did, which wasn't such good news, Brian, they eradicated 750 hectares of poppies. That compares to, that's up 111% from 2016. So that's not so good news. But nonetheless, 750 hectares of poppy eradication in a total production of 328,000 hectares. That has got to be considered a success for the opium trade globally.
Absolutely, Mike. And just for any newcomers to UK column that don't appreciate the very dry humour around this very dark subject, what we are showing, of course, is that since the West has got back and active in a military sense in Afghanistan, far from declining, the opium production has increased dramatically.
Well, that's absolutely right, Brian. As we can see here, NATO even adding more troops to Afghanistan, 3,000 additional troops. This was reported earlier in the month, I think on the 7th of November. So more NATO troops going to Afghanistan. We've got to remember that in 2001, as we can see from this graph from the United Nations, from a previous UN World Drugs Report, that in the year that the Taliban was in charge in Afghanistan, they had almost completely eradicated opium production, but the West went back into Afghanistan, and well, ever since then, yields have just increased. Hectares under cultivation have increased. It's been a massive success for the West. You know, since we are a mouthpiece for the Russians, let's have a look and see what the Russians said. Brian, Maria Zakharova, Foreign Ministry spokesperson speaking today, said Afghanistan's drug trafficking industry is a threat to international security and stability, and that, she says, is according to the UN Security Council. In March this year, Lavrov had made the point that during their operation in Afghanistan, the terrorist threat has not been rooted out, while the drug threat has increased many times over. Of course, we've got to remember John P. Walters, who was the Director of US Office for Drug Control Policy. In a memo, he said that Britain opened the door to narco traffickers in Afghanistan, particularly Helmand province, and now it's impossible to tell the difference between the traffickers and the insurgents. Absolutely at the doorstep of this country. A local Afghani MP, if you remember a few years ago, told an Iranian news agency that foreign forces deployed in Afghanistan are involved in the production and trafficking of opium in Afghanistan. She said, as long as foreign forces are present in Afghanistan, the cultivation, production and trafficking of drugs will continue in this country. And she made the point and reaffirmed the point that Helmand province, which of course was always traditionally under the control of the British since 2001, has been transformed into a profitable centre for foreign states to earn an expense fund for their deployment in the country. Well, I think it goes a bit beyond that, because this is what is keeping the international banking system afloat at the moment.
It's remarkable, Mike, isn't it? And the other thing, of course, we can see with this is that the policy extends across political parties. So it hasn't made any difference whether it was Tony Blair and Labour in power or David Cameron and Conservatives. The same policy goes on. We've got the war and the deaths overseas. Poppy crops, you would have thought we would have been controlling very tightly if that production was for pharmaceutical use. Well, of course it's not. So we've created the violence, we've destroyed the countries, and we've made sure that the opium production is up for those profits. what we're witnessing is the international cartel, which is a mixture of the banks and politics.
Absolutely, and this point about the pharmaceutical use of opiates is very important, because while we're seeing epidemic levels of opium misuse, heroin misuse in the United States and increasingly in the United Kingdom as well, British farmers are having to grow opium, or at least they're finding a market to grow opium in British fields in order to supply the National Health Service with opiates for medical use. So if there's any demonstration needed that the British government is complicit in this whole arrangement, I think that describes it very well. We have a responsibility, bearing in mind the intervention that we made in Afghanistan to try to sort that country out, but instead we're turning it into an opium factory for ourselves.